We begin with the murder investigation that has stunned the entertainment world.
One of the most famous stars in Hollywood history is dead at 36.
A healthy 32-year-old doesn't just die.
He ended up getting shot.
Hey guys, welcome to my channel. So today we'll be doing a Hollywood iceberg, and let me tell you, these celebrities are so evil. That's why I think it's so interesting. I mean, look at Taylor Swift. You wouldn't think Taylor Swift would be involved in something super dark and murderous. That is debatable. She does give me murder vibes. I'm insane. Alright, she was a bad example. I should have said O.J. Simpson. That man is a jolly old guy, and if you told me he was involved in, I don't know, a murder, I'd say you're lying. And that's why I'm doing this iceberg. You have Taylor Swift, who I'm sure we're all suspicious of, and then you have O.J. Simpson, a sweet, nice, innocent old man. So like I said, this is an iceberg video, and we will be starting from the bottom. So we will be starting with the most gruesome story. So yeah, let's get started. The Dark Abyss. In the 1960s, Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski were one of the most glamorous and popular couples in Hollywood. She was the doll-like beauty queen who was a rising star in movies like Valley of the Dolls and Don't Make Waves. And Roman was the up-and-coming director. Sharon and Roman were so in love that they decided to take the next step together and get married in a lavish star-studded ceremony on January 20th, 1968. The following year, there was more good news. Sharon was delighted to learn that she was pregnant with their first child, a baby boy. She was so excited to be a mom, and she spent her days buying baby clothes and excitedly preparing for her baby's arrival. But alas, the day would never come. In the summer of 1969, the couple was renting the house at 10050 Cielo Drive. At this time, Roman was in Europe, so his friend Frykowski and Frykowski's girlfriend Abigail Folger were staying with Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant at the time. While Sharon was basking in joy and peace, someone else was brewing in something a bit more sinister. Fueled with anger on the dreadful day of August 8th, Charles Manson ordered his follower, Tex Watson, to go to 10050 Cielo Drive with several other cult members and kill everyone there as gruesomely as you can. Obeying his orders, Watson drove to the estate with 3 other accomplices, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. When they arrived on the property after midnight, they encountered a car driven by Stephen Perrin, an 18-year-old who had been visiting the estate's caretaker in the guest house. Watson shot Stephen to death before he, Atkins, and Krenwinkel broke into the main house, leaving Linda Kasabian to stay at the gate as a lookout. There were 4 people in the home: Sharon Tate, Frykowski, Abigail Folger, and celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring. They were all forced to gather in the living room. Sharon and Jay Sebring were linked by ropes tied around their necks. Sebring was then shot and brutally stabbed to death. Frightened for their life, Frykowski and Abigail tried to make a break for it. They freed themselves and managed to flee the house, but they wouldn't make it far before they were chased down and killed by Krenwinkel and Watson. And finally, Sharon Tate was brutally stabbed to death. As they left, Susan Atkins used Sharon's blood to write the word pig on the front door. The crimes created a panic in Los Angeles. It was so horrific that fear consumed Los Angeles, and celebrities all over feared for their safety. The case wouldn't go unsolved for too long. On October 1969, various members of the Manson cult were arrested at their base in Death Valley. They were accused of stealing vehicles and burning a equipment. One of those arrested implicated Susan Atkins to an earlier murder. While jailed, she bragged about the Tate murders to her cellmates, and with this confession, all of the involved killers were quickly arrested. The trial began in 1970 with Kasabian, who had been granted immunity as the main prosecution witness. The accused were all found guilty and received the death penalty, but the sentences were commuted to life in prison after California abolished the death penalty. On January 15, 1947, a young mother was walking down the streets of Los Angeles with her young daughter as she always did, but this day was to be different. As she passed through the district, her daughter noticed something on the ground. "What is that?" she asked her mom. Her mom looked over and saw what appeared to be a mannequin that some pranksters had thrown in a vacant lot. She rolled her eyes and walked over to the mannequin to get a closer look. The closer she got, though, the more she realized that this was no mannequin. This mannequin was actually a human body that had been cut in half, drained of blood, and cruelly displayed for passerbys to view. And soon, the police and investigators swarmed this horrific scene. The victim was soon identified as Elizabeth Short. Elizabeth was born on July 24, 1924, in Hyde Park, Massachusetts. She was blessed with beautiful features, with her high cheekbones, flawless skin, raven black hair, and beautiful blue eyes. As a child, she had dreams of becoming a Hollywood star, but she had a tumultuous childhood to overcome. Ever since she was a child, Elizabeth's mother had told her that her father was probably dead. But one day, her father suddenly appeared at her doorstep, and he begged her mom to take him back. Elizabeth's mom was over it and told him to take a hike, which he did, to California. That is when Elizabeth realized that her dreams of becoming a Hollywood star was within her fingertips. Soon after her 19th birthday, Elizabeth set off to join her father. She led a tumultuous life in California, getting into fights with her father, being arrested for underage drinking, and leaning on men who were willing to help her out. Even with all this, she did not lose sight of her dreams. She attempted at a movie career and had several headshots taken. Tragically, her dreams would never become a reality, as her life was brutally cut short at the age of 22. With the brutal nature of her crime, this case was sensationalized and the corpse was named the Black Dahlia. No one could understand why she was so brutally attacked and who could do such a thing. The police immediately went to work and began questioning witnesses and interviewing suspects. Robert Manley was the last known person to see Elizabeth Short alive. He had been on a date with Elizabeth and told investigators that he left her at the Baltimore hotel. Manley was booked for the murder of the Black Dahlia, but was released after he passed a polygraph test. Another suspect was Walter Bailey. He was a surgeon and lived about 1 block away from where Elizabeth Short's body was found. Elizabeth's body was neatly dismembered. This led the police to suspect that someone with medical knowledge, like a surgeon, was behind it, but there was no other evidence that linked Walter Bailey to the crime. Now, there have been many more suspects, but they were all let go due to insufficient evidence. The case of the Black Dahlia has continued to grow, and while her killer has never officially been brought to justice, the mystery will never end. Who killed the Black Dahlia? The tip. Phil Hartman was one of the funniest comedians in America, and while many comedians have been known to have dark personal lives hidden behind their happy jokes, Phil Hartman's story proved to be especially tragic. While his career thrived, his personal life was rocky. His relationship with his third wife, Bryn, a model and actress, was a tumultuous affair. Bryn would frequently abuse drugs and alcohol. This would make her so angry and violent that she had to be physically restrained by Phil way too many times. It was so bad that Phil and his wife separated on numerous occasions. Phil's friends did not approve of Bryn's relationship, but there was nothing they could do when they would get back together time and time again. On the night of May 7th, 1998, Bryn Hartman had gone to dinner with a friend. They had a little catch up before Bryn decided to return home. Once she returned home though, that's when disaster struck. She had a bitter argument with her husband that spun out of control. Phil was angry with her for her erratic behavior when she was drunk in front of their daughter. He was over it and there would be no more excuses. It was time for a divorce. With the threat looming over his wife, Phil then went to bed. After taking Zoloft, cocaine, and alcohol, Bryn went into the bedroom at 3 a.m. and she shot her husband 3 times, killing him. In shock from what she had just done, she went to the house of Ron Douglas, a lover, and confessed to what she had just done. He went with Bryn to the house to see for himself, and that's when he discovered Phil's lifeless body, and he immediately called 911. When police arrived, they found the couple's 2 young children unharmed. As the kids were ushered out of the house, the police heard a door slam shut. As they rushed towards the room, they realized that Bryn had locked herself in the room with Phil's body. They desperately pounded on the door and begged for her to come out, but then, suddenly, a gunshot echoed through the house. They hurried to open the door, but it was too late. She was dead. The body. In 1921, Roscoe Arbuckle was the highest paid actor in the world. He had recently signed a $1 million deal with Paramount Pictures. This may sound like loose change for you rich guys, but let me tell you, this was crazy money back then. Fatty Arbuckle was known as the 266-pound comedian, as worth his weight in laughs. But before the year was out, he was accused of a crime so monstrous that he would never appear on screen again. On September 5th, 1921, there was a party at a San Francisco hotel with alcohol all over the place, and both Roscoe and a woman named Virginia Rappe were in attendance. As they partied the night away, Roscoe and Virginia were briefly in the same hotel room together. But when Roscoe left the room, Virginia was left, lying on the bed, writhing in pain. 4 days later, she died of a ruptured bladder. What happened in the hotel room that left poor Virginia dead? Did Roscoe make her laugh to death? Or was he a sick guy that needed to be locked up at once? Now, Virginia Rappe was a 26-year-old aspiring actress and model who had a reputation as something of a party girl. That fateful night, she arrived at the party with her friend, Bambina Del Monte. And according to Bambina, after a few drinks, Roscoe forced Virginia into his room and he shouted, "I've waited for you for 5 years, and now I've got you." After 30 minutes, Bambina got worried when she heard screams. She desperately began knocking on the door, begging for it to open up. Roscoe finally opened the door with a foolish smile on his face, and Virginia lay on the bed, naked and moaning in pain. Bambina then saw her poor friend mouth, "Roscoe did it," before she was rushed to a different hotel room. Now you do have to know that this story is drastically different from the one Roscoe says. According to him, he had gone into his bathroom and found Virginia already there on the floor. Worried, he called for the hotel doctor, who determined that she was just heavily intoxicated, and took her into another hotel room to sleep it off. 3 days later, when she was still sick, she was rushed to the doctor, and it turned out that she had peritonitis, resulting from a ruptured bladder likely caused by a pre-existing condition. The ruptured bladder and peritonitis are what killed her the next day. Even with this ruling by the doctors, Roscoe was still arrested due to Bambina's crazy allegations. Newspapers across the country went wild. Some said that the overweight Roscoe had damaged Virginia's liver by crushing her while trying to assault her, while others offered up increasingly outrageous stories. Now I do have to mention that Bambina Del Monte was a fraud. She was also known as Madam Black, and she had a reputation for bringing girls to Hollywood parties, using those girls to instigate scandalous acts, and then blackmailing celebrities anxious to keep those acts quiet. She was such a fraud that she wasn't even called to the stand in court because the prosecutors knew that her ever-changing stories were a lie. Meanwhile, Roscoe's lawyers showed that the autopsy had concluded that there were no signs of an attack. They called on witnesses who corroborated this version of events, and he stuck to his innocence. 3 trials later, Roscoe was acquitted. He was found to be innocent in the eyes of the law, and he could finally go back to being the funny comedian he was. But it was already too late. His movies were pulled from cinemas, and he never worked on screen again. He would no longer remain in front of the camera. He would now spend the rest of his life trapped behind the camera. He died of a heart attack in 1933 at the age of 46, having never fully restored his reputation. Their worlds seemed destined to collide. They were 2 of the most talented hip-hop rappers on the scene. They rapped about their life on the streets, the racial divide, and social injustice. But there was one big difference between Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls. They represented different coasts, with Tupac from the west and Biggie from the east. But to really learn their story, we have to start from the beginning. Tupac was born in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City. He was raised by a single mother who moved her family around a lot to escape the high crime areas. They eventually settled in California, where Tupac showed real talent and love for poetry. A rapper was born. He broke into the scene in 1991 with the release of his debut album, Tupacalypse Now. Meanwhile, back in New York City, Christopher Biggie Wallace was raised in Brooklyn. He spent his teen years attending prestigious high schools, dealing drugs, and rapping. He made his mark when a demo he made gained momentum and was spotlighted on a magazine. This caught the sight of Diddy, who chose to represent him. By 1993, Tupac was already a platinum-selling artist, and Biggie wanted to be a part of his circle. That time would come at a Los Angeles party. It was there that Biggie caught sight of Tupac and asked a drug dealer to introduce him. There was immediate mutual respect between the two. There was a bright future for the rap duo, but this respect wouldn't last for too long. Their relationship would soon be riddled with fallout after fallout. Their first big fallout happened when they were scheduled to work on a project for another rapper, Little Sean. Tupac arrived at the recording studios on November 30th, 1994, and was getting ready to head upstairs to where Biggie was. But instead, Tupac was gunned down in the lobby and shot 5 times. He survived the attack but was convinced Biggie was behind the attack. He remembered seeing Biggie afterwards and noticed that his whole crew looked guilty. Now, there was never proof that Biggie knew about the incident, but a couple of months later, Biggie embraced this accusation with a single called Who Shot Ya? Tupac could not believe he was being antagonized with a single from his worst enemy, so he quickly fired back with his song Hit 'Em Up, where he bragged about sleeping with Biggie's wife. This bitter feud would soon escalate into a tragic end on September 7, 1996. Tupac watched a boxing match at the MGM Grand. In the casino afterward, Tupac fought with Orlando Anderson, a Crips gang member. Anderson was pushed to the ground and kicked before security guards intervened. However, no official complaint was filed, and everyone in the flight departed the hotel. As Tupac and his friends drove off into the night, their lives would never be the same. As they were sitting at a stoplight, an unknown man in a white Cadillac pulled up and fired 14 shots. Tupac was hit 4 times, twice in the chest, once in the arm, and once in the thigh. He was taken to the hospital and died 6 days later. He was only 25. Authorities believe that the incident may have been gang-related. As with gang crimes, they are very difficult to solve due to a code of secrecy within the gang. Others believe Biggie was behind the cold murder. There were reports that Biggie had been meeting up with members of the Crips gang to put a hit on Tupac. He allegedly offered $1 million and the murder weapon to take his enemy out. A month later, on March 9, 1997, Biggie was murdered in a drive-by shooting in Los Angeles. After an award show, Biggie and his friends were headed to an after-party when a car pulled up and fired several shots into the front passenger window. Biggie was killed instantly. He was only 24. Despite the fact that Tupac and Biggie are 2 of the most high-profile rappers of all time, their murders remain unsolved to this day. The surface. Rebecca Schaeffer was born on November 6, 1967 in Oregon, and she was an only child. She had a passion for drama and was approached to try modeling at an early age. And a couple years later, she moved to New York City to pursue a career in entertainment. She got a few opportunities, including a role in a small soap opera, before her big break came when she landed the role of Patty on the sitcom My Sister Sam. With this new role, Rebecca moved to California in 1986. My Sister Sam aired 44 episodes between 1986 and 1988, and her fan base grew exponentially. During that time, she was the cover girl for 17's March 1987 issue, and she went on to star in several movies. She had the dream job, the looks, and the fans. Oh, how the fans adored her. But in 1989, everything would come to a sudden halt for poor Rebecca when a stranger knocked on her door. It was an ordinary Tuesday, and 21-year-old Rebecca was curious to see who was at the door. She opened the door to see a 19-year-old fan named Robert Juan Bardo. He had hired a private investigator to find Schaefer's address, and he arrived carrying a card she had sent him, her photo, and a copy of The Catcher in the Rye. Rebecca was delighted to see a fan. She greeted Robert, smiled, and told him to take care. But Robert wasn't satisfied. He returned an hour later to her doorstep, and this time he pointed a pistol at her chest and shot her directly in the heart. At this point, Rebecca was screaming and wailing. As the light faded behind her eyes, she muttered one word: "Why? Why?" Robert then fled the scene and was later found running down the freeway in Tucson, Arizona, yelling, "I killed Rebecca Schaeffer." He was arrested for Rebecca's murder, and in 1991, the obsessed fan was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no one like Marilyn Monroe. She was a blonde bombshell of the 1950s and 60s, and people couldn't get enough. She had overcome a rough childhood to become one of the biggest Hollywood movie stars of her time. But the sadness would always linger, and 1961 was the hardest time for poor Marilyn. She had divorced her third husband, Arthur Miller, and there were also rumors about an alleged affair between her and President John F. Kennedy, and she was struggling. Overcome with depression, Marilyn would frequently abuse alcohol and drugs to take away her pain. She was under constant care of a psychiatrist as she isolated herself in her Brentwood, Los Angeles home. But things were starting to look up the following year. In 1962, Marilyn Monroe was trying to put her life together. She was on the cover of magazines, and she had just signed up for new projects. This wouldn't last for too long, and soon everything would come crashing down with a snap. After midnight on August 5th, 1962, her maid, Eunice, noticed Marilyn's bedroom light turned on. Panicked, Eunice knocked on Marilyn's door, but with no response, she knew something was horribly wrong. She hurriedly called Monroe's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, who gained access to the room by breaking a window. Entering, he found Marilyn Monroe dead. She was only 36 years old. She had a phone receiver in her hand and was lying face down without any clothes on. By her side was an empty pill bottle that had held 50 capsules of Nembutal, a drug often used as a sleeping pill. The police were called a little while after. An autopsy found a fatal amount of sedatives in her system, and her death was ruled probable suicide. Her death shocked the nation. She was too young, too popular, and too full of life. In recent decades, there have been a number of conspiracies about her death, most of which claim that she was murdered by President John F. Kennedy or his brother, Robert Kennedy, with whom she allegedly had love affairs. Apparently, the Kennedys had killed her or had her killed because they feared she would expose their love affairs and government secrets. On August 4th, 1962, the day before Marilyn was found dead, Robert Kennedy was in Los Angeles, and 2 decades after the tragic end, Marilyn's maid, Eunice, announced for the first time that Robert Kennedy had visited Marilyn on the night of her death, and they were involved in a fiery argument. But the reliability of these and other statements are questionable. Brittany Murphy was a beautiful, petite, doe-eyed actress known for her roles in movies like Clueless and Uptown Girls. She was a star and gained continuous success year after year until one day it all came shattering down. On November 2009, Brittany traveled to Puerto Rico to film a movie. With her was her husband Simon Monjack and mother Sharon Murphy. As soon as they arrived, things immediately went wrong. Brittany was fired the first day due to her husband's on-set drunken behavior. She was so upset but decided to stay on the island and vacation for a bit. That was when Brittany's mom and her husband both caught staphylococcus. The infection got so serious that on the flight back to Los Angeles, Brittany had to give her husband CPR and he had a mild heart attack. Eventually, Brittany also caught staphylococcus and she suffered severely. By mid-December, she had a terrible bout of laryngitis and was going through her second period in a month that caused anemia. For 6 weeks, she thought she could overcome it and didn't seek any medical attention. But finally, she had enough. So that Friday, she called in and made an appointment for Monday, but she would never make it through that weekend. Even though Brittany was suffering, she was still a caretaker for both her husband and her mom. Her mother struggled with neuropathy after surviving breast cancer, and her husband dealt with seizures and sleep apnea. She put her struggles to the side to take care of her family. On her final night, Brittany was gasping for breath. Her lips turned blue from the lack of oxygen as her lungs filled with fluid. She took antibiotics, migraine pills, cough medicine, and an over-the-counter nasal spray. Soon after, she fell in the bathroom and told her mom, "I am dying. I'm going to die. Mommy, I love you." Her mom desperately called 911, but it was too late. Brittany Murphy passed away at the age of 32. An autopsy concluded that pneumonia and anemia resulted in this tragic loss. But people couldn't believe a healthy, vibrant young woman would die of pneumonia and anemia. People worldwide demanded answers. While the world continued to reel from the loss, there was another shocking revelation. Just 5 months later, Simon Monjack died at the age age of 40 in the same bedroom as Brittany and also from acute pneumonia and anemia. The odd coincidence of the cause of death and where the body was found led to whispers of a possible poisoning, but Brittany's mother was quick to silence the rumors by quickly releasing the autopsy findings for Simon. Even with this, many still aren't convinced. So, the mystery remains. Was it a coincidence that both Brittany Murphy and her husband died only months apart with the same cause? Or was there something a bit more sinister at work? Natalie Wood began her career at the age of 4 and was signed to 20th Century Fox due to her remarkable talent. Soon after her debut, she set her sights on a handsome older man named Robert Wagner, who worked at 20th Century Fox. Natalie was 10 and Robert was 18 when she first saw him walking down the hall. She quickly turned to her mother and said, "I'm going to marry him." And marry him she did. Their first marriage lasted from 1957 to 1962, before they separated due to their frequent fights before remarrying in 1972. On November 1981, Natalie took a trip with her husband Robert and her co-star Christopher Walken to Catalina Island on their boat Splendor. The three actors had been drinking, and things quickly turned dark. In a fit of anger, Robert reportedly broke a bottle over Natalie's seemingly close relationship with her co-star. He was jealous and fuming. After that incident, Natalie and her husband were in a heated argument that would not end. Later that evening, Robert was suddenly unable to find his wife. He searched all over the boat to no avail. It was now 11 p.m. At 1:30 a.m., a call was made to shore, and 2 hours later, the Coast Guard was finally called. There was a 4-hour delay to call the Coast Guard. The worst was confirmed at 8 a.m. when Natalie's body was discovered floating in the water off Catalina Island. Her death was ruled an accidental drowning. It was theorized that Natalie fell in the water after attempting to secure a dinghy on the boat. However, this is quite unbelievable, as Natalie was known to have a lifelong fear of water. Why would a young lady with a fear of water put herself in such a position? Was this really an accident, or was someone else behind her death? An autopsy was conducted. It noted several bruises on her arms, legs, and face, believed to be consistent with the fall overboard while she was trying to board the dinghy. It was officially ruled an accident. This would all change when 30 years after her death, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened their investigation and officially changed her cause of death. Investigators determined that some of the bruises found on Natalie's body may have been sustained before she drowned. It was no longer accidental. It was now undetermined, with her husband named a person of interest. So what do you think? Did her husband have something to do with it? Or was poor Natalie killed by her worst fear? So that's it for this iceberg video, and if you guys enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!